I am David Bowling, the Executive Director here at Launch Fishers. Welcome to Startup Mastery. It's great to have you guys here this morning. It was interesting when we started sending out invitations from us at Launch Fishers and our friends at Plug and Play. We started sending all these out, and then people were responding back, hey, I'd love to be there, we're going to be there. And then it was, can't make it, but can I send this on and have someone from my team show up? And we're like, yes, that would be awesome. So for those of you that are extensions of or follow on or added invitations, we thank you for showing up and joining us. As we continue to do these, you're more than welcome. Put these on your calendar, start following us, follow Launch Fishers, Plug and Play. As it says here, these are intended to connect innovators across our healthcare network here in Indiana. As I'm going to invite Brandon, my friend, up and our partner at Plug and Play, I'll let him introduce the panel, but these are designed from our perspective at Launch Fishers to bring up and give a chance to put some of our startup companies, our entrepreneurs up here and get them connected into the healthcare network. And so that's what we're trying to do here from Launch Fishers. It was great, a little bit of Launch Fishers in the last couple of days to be out for those of you for what we do here of being out at over in at Tech Point and being at the Mirror Awards and trying to recognize and support some of our entrepreneurs who are out with recognizing some awards, and great to support them. We had one over there for Rising Entrepreneur of the Year. Even Plug and Play was over there. What was your award this year? You did not get it, but you were a loser, but we were there to support you. So the community impacts, we're there to support. But for us collectively, we are doing these here to make an impact for in our healthcare community here in Indiana. So we thank all of you guys for coming here today and to support us and to support what we are doing collectively. So Brandon, I want you to come up and I'll let you introduce the panelists, and then at the end, I'll come back up and say a few words of thank you. So glad to have you, my friend.
Thank you. I'm actually going to have the panelists come up and they're going to introduce themselves. I'm going to tell everybody a deep, dark secret about myself. I have this terrible fear of, one, mispronouncing people's names, two, not remembering their names, and three, just entirely butchering what they do. So I'm one of the worst moderators ever on a panel. I am not supposed to be here. Eileen Alberding, who's one of the best moderators of a panel, was supposed to be here, but she's having back issues, so please pray for her, and we need her healthy because she is the straw that stirs this drink. So I'm going to have the panel please come up, and you're going to introduce yourselves. And we're going to ask, who drove the furthest to get here? Mark? Where? Ireland. Is anyone further than Ireland? Well, wait, you guys stand up. Wait, we're going to have you introduce yourself. If you're from Ireland to come to Indiana.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark from Ireland, as you now know. I'm the CEO of Neurobel. We're a medical device company working with Parkview for the past couple of years, developing a device for seizure detection in neonates. Thanks.
All right, we'll go right down the line. Introduce yourself, your company, and kind of like briefly your journey to get to the position you're in today.
Fantastic. Okay, testing. Can everyone hear me? Sounds like it's on. My name is Alyssa Antcliff. I am a speech-language pathologist by background, and when I was in grad school, I noticed how challenging it is for us as clinicians to keep our patients on track between sessions. We are typically giving them paper handouts, and just inevitably, it's really challenging for them to remember to do those at home or keep track of those at home. So I sought to create what we have today. Our software called IndiAide stands for Individualized Aid, and clinicians can more easily share and track and send patients reminders for their activities between sessions. So we help clinicians keep their patients on track between sessions.
Now, are you a born and raised Indiana Hoosier? Where'd you go to school? Where'd you grow up? We're going to get really deep into some of these.
So I am from Valparaiso, Indiana, northwest up by Chicago. So the Indy area was newer to me when I moved down here. Everything up there is Chicago news, Chicago sports. But I went to Purdue for both undergrad and grad school, and that is where I had the inspiration for the company that we have today.
Incredible. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Ryan Callahan. I'm from Indianapolis originally, went to Pike High School. I now live in South Bend, where my wife is on the faculty at Notre Dame, and I lead the U.S. office of Prova Health. We are consultants who work with healthcare innovators, bringing new products and services to market. And one of the reasons why I ended up doing this work is I spent some time in South Bend in the business side of healthcare delivery, and I saw how difficult it was for novel innovations to successfully achieve reimbursement and scale, and wanted to come over to this side and help do something about it.
Is Callahan an Irish last name?
Cork, in fact.
There we go. All right.
All right, I'm Ethel Massing. I originally grew up in Warsaw, Indiana. I live in Fort Wayne and work for Parkview Health. I'm the Director of Innovation and Strategic Enterprises, where we are in charge of commercialization, IP for the health system. So we spin out ideas that come from Parkview, but we also do a tremendous amount of work with startup companies, bringing new technologies into the system, doing a lot of co-development work. We run global challenges. And then I have, on the strategic enterprises side, I have roles with with a couple of our startup spin-out companies. So like you, we were up for a Mira Award with our startup company. And like you, we also lost. So for Innovation of the Year.
Losers.
It's rigged. But then I'm also VP for Prova Health, which is another company we run selling services out of Parkview. So I work with startup companies and then fully understand some of the things you go through, because we do that as well, even from an enterprise side. And my deep-seated fear, Brandon, is sitting next to Ryan on a panel.
There we go.
You're gonna hear great things from Ryan today.
Welcome to entrepreneurship. We're all facing our fears today. I mean, Parkview is growing and expanding throughout the state. I'm Brandon Knoll. I'm from Northeast Indiana, born and raised. I'm the director of Plug and Play Indiana. Our team, Carlins and Cameron, are in the back. They're both on the ventures team. Cameron leads Life Tech Ventures. Carlins leads MedTech Ventures. Our team, so Plug and Play is in 63 locations, 27 countries, operate 25 different industry verticals. Our team leads MedTech and Life Sciences globally for Plug and Play. We happen to be located here in the great state of Indiana. A $99 billion life science economy, orthopedic capital of the world in Warsaw, Indiana, radio pharma here in central Indiana. So our team is kind of doing innovation at scale globally, just happen to be here in Indiana. But Parkview, I always knew Parkview in Northeast Indiana. You guys have kind of grown and expanded throughout the state.
We have, and that's a really big initiative for us right now, as all of you understand. The only way to get by is through economies of scale. And so, you know, as the leader in health, as in quality and safety in the state, we really feel like we have a lot to offer. So right now, today, we're sitting at 15 hospitals with hopefully like 18 if the new LOIs go through, and the new hospital we're building at Purdue. Well, obviously, we're going to build the hospital at Purdue, but if these two LOIs, it'll soon to be 18 hospitals.
It's incredible.
And continuing to grow, so.
All right, well, we'll jump right into sort of the conversation. And this is more for like Ethel and Ryan. You guys are more on the strategic side. And then Alyssa, you're going to be more sort of startup side. So what's the hidden cost of poor patient engagement to health systems and kind of health population outcomes? We'll just start with Ethel and go to Ryan.
Yeah, so the one thing that we know is that disengaged patients are sick patients. And they are the patients that are going to come to you at the most expensive point of care. And generally, that's the emergency department. And when that happens, when you get a sicker patient population, the hidden cost is that it not just costs that patient, just both in health and cost, But that cost is really to everyone, especially as we continue to build on with charity care. And there's so many stories right now about unreimbursed care. Greene County just sued Medicare for unreimbursed funds. So when we have expensive care, it costs, again, not the patient, it costs the health system, but it also costs insurers and employers, because your employers cover the cost of your health care, and as that goes up, that hurts everyone's bottom line.
It's a great point. I would just add that in addition to poor clinical outcomes, for example, in chronic disease management, where you might have been able to avoid a costly emergency room visit or hospital admission, there's also an entire cost base, and many people believe quite a lot of waste from administrative inefficiency. And I think part of patient engagement is ensuring that patients are showing up to their appointments so that you have better utilization and fewer no-shows, and using the most cost-effective means of doing things like scheduling appointments or other tasks that patients might even prefer to do without the need of a high-cost resource.
I'm going to come back to something. All right, so Alyssa, so how does a disengagement show up on your end from like real patient recoveries and journeys?
Yeah, so I'm more on the outpatient side with our software, and what we see is that disengagement shows up with just disconnection first, and patients themselves feeling like maybe there's a lack of progress, they're feeling a lack of support. I mentioned that it's challenging to keep our patients on track, and that's really where we see the disengagement start, is if the patients are forgetting to do those activities at home, and they're seeing less progress, we're seeing less progress, their outcomes are being, our goals are being pushed farther and farther out, because we're just not getting that connection between the clinic and home, and seeing that progress between sessions.
What year did you start your startup?
Yeah, so 2020, mid-COVID, we were applying for NSF grants with the Mayo Clinic and the University of Washington out in Seattle, because we had this idea and this initial prototype and saw a use case for it in hospitals, where if people were very sick with COVID, they needed some way to connect with their family outside of the hospital system. And so that was also useful for our software, because caregivers can be connected to the same patient account. And so that's where we started, was in 2020. As you can imagine, the NSF funded all pharmaceuticals for COVID. So we were not funded, but we did make it to the final round and get a lot of feedback, and started pilot studies then with the University of Washington thereafter. We officially incorporated as a company at the end of 2024.
So show of hands, how many people use Amazon for, I don't know, items opposed to going to Walmart or Meijer? Okay, how many people have an actual insurance agent, brick and mortar, you walk into to change your policy? How many people do it online? Just show of hands. Well, show your hands if you don't go into some guy or gal, like you don't have a brick and mortar. I feel like with healthcare, the inflection point, I mean, everybody else has already shifted and moved. Healthcare seems to be way behind, but the inflection point, I believe, was COVID. People are staying at home. How can we, get the same quality of care by not leaving our house? And that kind of goes to, I'm going off script. I'm 10 minutes in going off script, which will make Ethel hate me. But I mean, talk about like Parkview and what the 1842 fund, like the initiative on like rural care, and thinking about it from that lens. I mean, Indiana is a fairly rural community. Quality patient care is important. How does that individual who lives in rural America get the same quality of care as someone that's in a metro?
Yeah, I think telehealth is a big piece of that. And we were really, I will say, lucky at Parkview when COVID happened, because we put a lot of investment into technology infrastructure, and we were already doing telehealth, not the way we did it in COVID, but we had the infrastructure and people were doing telehealth prior to COVID. So it was very easy for us to turn on, where other health systems had to ramp up. This is where thinking ahead and being prepared really helped us, because we could very easily turn on telehealth for every other provider who wasn't using it at the time to really drive that. And so that's one way. But you're right. We have rural hospitals. One of our furthest hospital, LaGrange, has a buggy barn for the Amish. So you talk about, when you're thinking about patient engagement and buying from Amazon, and we have patients who are still showing up in horse and buggies. And so it can be very challenging, but really thinking about best ways to use remote patient monitoring and, you know, even creative ways where technologies now have cell phones embedded in them because they don't have cell service, so they may not have a smartphone. So you really have to be creative and think about all the pieces that patients are going to need.
Ryan?
Just to add that in the spectrum of virtual care and remote delivery models, I think we've all been sort of familiar with the idea of using telehealth for acute questions. Say, I think my kid has an ear infection, or I want advice on whether I should go to the emergency room for such and such an injury. But what we're seeing more and more over the last couple of years, and why I think what Alyssa's building is particularly exciting, is more specialty care being able to be delivered through a virtual model, which is additionally beneficial to patients in rural and remote communities who, yeah, you know, my father-in-law lives in a very small town in Harrison County. They have a primary care health clinic in his town, but there's no rheumatologist, there's no oncologist. How can we make those specialties more widely available? And I think that's where there's really exciting things happening now.
So were you lucky or good by doing this, like in the midst of COVID, knowing that there's a big healthcare transition into something more digital, remote, and quite frankly, more patient-centered?
Yeah, I was actually lucky enough in my time as a grad student at Purdue, and part of the inspiration for this was before teletherapy was really a thing, it was starting to become more known, and top universities were starting to get access to it, just as top hospital systems as well. And so in 2017 and 2018 was when I was first seeing I saw a patient via teletherapy at Purdue. And that was really a unique experience, but that's where I started to see how I was actually gaining more insight into what was going on at home because I had to. I was actually seeing them in their home environment, even though I was at the university. So I was lucky in the sense that Purdue was ahead of the curve, and I got to get some teletherapy experience and really see how the gap needed to be bridged from the clinic to home. And then just pursued my passion. I think that's really important as an entrepreneur, is to get guidance, and I was lucky to have some amazing mentors at the time who encouraged me to really go after what we were starting to build.
It's awesome. Yeah, I remember, long before we would have all these questions that would then tell you probably the root of your problems. You would just like jump on WebMD, type in some symptoms, and it would come back like the worst thing ever. And it's like, well, this is not good. So I'm glad that we've evolved a little bit as a healthcare system. What's one patient engagement gap entrepreneurs must solve to truly move the needle on outcomes? We'll start here.
I'll start on that one. So that gap is the gap between the clinic and home. That is where we really need to be able to have more touch points with the patient, and for the patient to be able to have more touch points with us as clinicians. And so that is what I see as the gap, the carryover, them actually remembering to do those activities, getting reminders, seeing everything that they're supposed to be doing, well explained, and be able to ask questions right then and there.
I'd say that in designing a solution for which patient engagement is very important, trust is a central question. And what I mean by trust is that there is a mirror universe bad form of patient engagement that is out there, where the provider or the clinician just wants the patient to do work for them. So an example of this is if you go to a doctor's appointment and they want you to upload your insurance card. It's like, I don't want to fiddle with the camera. Like, why can't you just feed this in to the scanner the way you used to? You're just pushing work off on me. And I think a lot of times patient engagement can go wrong if it's just take from the patients. You know, report your symptoms, tell me how you're doing, respond to this text, schedule this appointment. And instead it should be a give and take. So how can patient engagement be structured in a way where the patient gets something, gets a feeling of certainty, gets advice, has the sort of access to clinical care that they might not have otherwise, and in return can provide information back. And so getting that balance right, I think, is really critical in design.
Yeah, well, now I'm going to change my answer, which is great. I look because the last mile is really a problem. Like, how do we get patients to continue to do the things they need to do when they go home? But I think on the reverse side of that is when you talk about take, we talk about feed. Every startup, not every startup, but many startup thinks we're just going to give you extra information, and that is going to help you, and we're going to inundate you with information, and it's, can we do anything about it? Is it the right time? And that doesn't help on either side. One, patients don't feel engaged because I sent you 30 days of every heartbeat that I took. Why didn't you look at that? And it's like, your heartbeat the whole 30 days, that's all I really care. Like, it didn't stop, great. But people think like, oh, this is gonna be great. You're gonna be able to see every heartbeat that patient took in 30 days. What am I gonna do with that? And so I think that's a real key piece, is really thinking about, if you're a startup, if you're feeding data back, is it the data they want? Is it in the form they want it? And is it at the right time that they're going to be able to give actionable feedback to patients?
This is going to be a really naive question. Who owns your data? Like your patient data, do you own it? Does Epic, like how does that all work? Because I continue to hear these conversations around, if we're doing patient-centric care, well, who owns the data? How does it get to the clinician? How does it get to the physician? How does it get to the specialist? Is there an Epic issue, or is it I actually own all of my data and can take that wherever I want to? I don't know the answer, that's why I'm asking the question.
You go start.
I would just say this is an evolving area of legal inquiry. I think patients have certain rights to obtain their data and there are interoperability requirements that data in a limited form be shared. Whether patients are aware of or can effectively act on those rights, I think, is another question. But the Blue Button initiative over the last 15 years was a major example of this, where the federal government made your data available to you that then you could download in raw format. I think the bigger question of, are there people who have information about you that you can't get? I think the answer is yes. There are insurance companies who have a set of data about you derived from your clinical information that's theirs to do with what they please. Epic certainly has some data that is less readily available. Ethel can probably comment on that in greater detail, but in Europe, there are more fulsome efforts to put patients in the driver's seat, and they have seen greater adoption of things like patient-driven, patient-owned health records that then you can take around to different providers, which I think probably has a place in our delivery system as well.
Yeah, because the legal answer is that the patient owns their data, but in reality, we know that's not the truth. And when the HITECH Act came out, and when it was mandated that people move to electronic health records, that was the whole intent. That was the intention, I feel, of the law, that the interoperability. And unfortunately, interoperability has really been a myth that we've been striving for a long time. So do systems talk to each other? Yeah, they do. But do they talk to each other well? Not really.
Yeah.
If you've ever tried to use Google Translate to speak to someone in a different language, that's what it's like. Like it's kind of like that. We can kind of get the gist, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can use like a personal example. Our son has like a thyroid issue. He's like 11 months old. And it was, and I'll tell you, I don't know if I'm supposed to share all this, but it's my son, so I think I'm allowed to.
You're not a covered entity.
Yeah.
So, no, this is where I get like so frustrated, because we were talking about like how do we make like healthcare systems better, and how do we connect and have better patient outcomes. So son's born in the state of Indiana. Thankfully, they make you do a heel prick right away. They check, you get the blood done, they check everything. Well, he had some numbers were off on his thyroid. Our primary physician was like, oh, no big deal, this happens. I've seen this like 8 times. Normally when they go back a week later, they do the heel prick and the numbers are better for the thyroid and everything will be great. Well, we get to a point where that's not the case. And so then the state punts this to Parkview. And so now not only do we talk to our primary physician, who has no idea what to do with a infant with a thyroid issue, but now it's like we had to go to our primary physician to get information from Parkview. Parkview had to go to the primary physician to tell them to then tell us. And it was like, we're a family that we don't do sort of medications. We're a very natural family. And so now it's like, go take this pill tomorrow. And we're sitting here going like, well, can we talk to the specialist? Like, no, not yet. You still have to go through the primary care physician. Thankfully, 3 years ago, I was at a conference with the individual who is the person from Parkview that was working with my son, and I happened to run into him 2 days after we get all of this information at a conference in Indianapolis, and I went up to him and I said, hey, this is my son, the name, and he's like, I'll text you. And we went back and forth together, and that's how we were able to like not only get information so we can make better decisions as parents, but that was like our way of circumventing the system. And I thought, what stupidity we have that our family has just had a baby. We're in this whole new, like uncharted waters for our family, and we can't even talk directly to the person who's gonna make all of the decisions. We had to like go through a primary care physician to then talk to Parkview, and I was like, this is so stupid. And so I just get so frustrated with like that part of the healthcare system that I wish we could figure out and circumvent. It doesn't seem like it's that challenging, but I guess it must be from a legal standpoint. So anyway, I get off my little soapbox and digress, but I will say Parkview has been incredible with our son, so shout out Parkview and the team, because they've been incredible. And probably you should get a different physician who maybe knows a little more about things with infants. That's a parenting thing, not a patient thing. All right, so what's one collaborative technology tactic that delivers measurable outcomes and one that falls short?
Okay, so I think on the patient side, them being able to provide feedback. So that is a crucial piece of our software that we are launching this month. We're launching a new version of our software, and every time a patient marks an activity complete, they will get a feedback form of just one question. Keep it simple, and it can be something that the clinician chooses, whether this was too challenging or too easy and anywhere in between, or a general like weekly wins, weekly challenges, just giving that patient more access to say like, hey, this is what's working and what's not for me. And so that's something that we have found in feedback from both patients and clinicians that would just drive their care so much more. If there was additional patient input from home, not just like, hey, I completed this, or I'm actually doing my activities, but this is how it went, and how it could be better. That's one thing that we've seen work. And to Ethel's point earlier, when we're just giving information, that's what doesn't. The clinician's actually walking the patient through, for example, the platform, and this is how you're going to see the information. This is what's coming from me. This is how you can tell me what you need. There needs to be that education piece as well. If there's not, and it's hey, here's this cool platform we're using, that just doesn't work for patients.
Is there like a gamify or gamification play into your app where it's like, I don't know, Candy Crush or whatever, where people get all excited when they get all of the things and
yes,
everything sparkles?
We're taking feedback on what that could and should be for patients. We work with a variety of populations, so pediatrics through adults, and usually for early pediatrics, it's parents that are completing the activities, so you don't want to assume that if it's a pediatric, then this should be the game that they get. So we're working on that, but more of we do like a little celebration whenever they complete an activity. We do have some, and then progress metrics for them so they can see the progress they're making over time. But we don't have anything right now like you get these coins for completing this, and this is what you get if you get to this level. But we're working on how we could do that.
That's awesome.
Just a couple of design questions that I think go into digital solutions that are very important for making them successful. The first is understanding what the baseline is for measurements that you're taking of any kind. Take wearables, for example. People are going to have different baseline readings, individual by individual. And at the same time, in the academic and medical literature, we know that certain ranges are healthy or normal at a population level. And bridging those two sets of facts is very difficult to do in a user interface, and something that can then lead to a lot of confusion, particularly on this second point, which is how alerts or escalation are structured. Getting too many alerts and therefore false positives is a problem. It's also obviously a problem if you miss something concerning. And so as innovators are thinking about how to set up these UIs, investing quite a bit in this area is something that we've seen be successful. And there's kind of a public policy angle to this that makes it even more difficult, which is that once you cross the boundary from being a so-called wellness device to something that is intended to diagnose or treat a condition, that triggers additional regulatory requirements. Now, those have recently been softened. There's a loophole you can drive a truck through now that says if you're measuring a physiological indicator like blood pressure, but you're not saying necessarily that something is wrong with the reading, just that, hey, you might talk to a doctor about this, that opens up quite a bit more space for wearable companies to innovate in that area. So I think paying attention to those two design factors is really important.
Can you dive into that just a little bit more? Only because, I mean, our team works with a ton of medtech startups, and a lot of them early stage, and it's so important on the front end to figure out what's your device and what is your regulatory requirement down the road, because you can, I mean, depending upon what class is going to depend upon like your timeline to commercialization, your regulatory compliance, all that. So can you get into a little bit, especially on the wearable side? I assume a lot of people have Apple Watches and Whoops and all that. Like we're kind of in this deep patient monitoring place right now, and wearables are a big thing. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of the device requirements?
Yeah, and maybe Alyssa, I can invite your personal experience with this as well. But I'd say a chief question strategically for early stage companies to solve is what claims do I want to be able to make that are relevant to the design of my device? And you might want to make a more maximalist claim that if you monitor this health information via a wearable, we will reduce the incidence of heart attacks. That's something that would get people's attention and be a big health impact, but it also then triggers quite a bit more regulatory scrutiny because you can't just go around saying that. On the other hand, the same technology might be useful for understanding your stress levels throughout a given day, which is classified more as a wellness category. And the thing is, you don't have to choose just one and leave it that way forever. So a pretty common journey for an early stage company to make is to start with this wellness category, so to be able to make a narrower claim that has less regulatory burden, and then build evidence as you go to be able to make stronger, more software as a medical device type claims. Anything to add?
I do, yes. So we had to qualify a software as a medical device, and so that process was an FDA process. However, since now the FDA, if anyone is in startups and is looking for digital health guidance, the FDA does have a digital health portion of their site where you can take a quiz basically and answer questions about your device, and they will guide you as far as we're going to enforce discretion is the terminology of saying that you don't necessarily need to be formally registered, or you might need to file a 510K, for example. And so you can start to get some guidance directly from the FDA. And then in qualifying for software as a medical device, which we are going through that process again right now because our platform is going to be brand new, that's coming out in May. You can use a third party. It's usually a health tech legal who has lots of experience in this area. And they are basically assessing our software and ensuring that it does continue to qualify for software as a medical device. So that's the process that we have gone through. And the reason reason that we had to go through that process is because we qualify for a reimbursement pathway that clinicians can only engage with if they are using a qualifying platform. And the definition of that is software as a medical device with the FDA and meeting the requirements of the CPT codes.
How challenging, we're getting into something else, because we have these conversations with startups. I mean, part of it is making money. I mean, how challenging is it to either work with the federal government or whomever on reimbursement and getting those codes?
Yeah, well, so in terms of us qualifying for those codes and qualifying as software as a medical device, that third-party process moves as quickly as your lawyers can move, basically, and so as quickly as that team can move. So you do want someone who's experienced and who you trust with that stamp of approval and that process. But in terms of the CPT codes and getting reimbursed, that is a different story for every single insurance in every single state. We are learning, and that is because these codes are relatively new. They came out in 2022 and then expanded here in 2026 for remote therapeutic monitoring. And some states haven't yet adopted them for their Medicaid programs. Even some Medicare in a couple of states that we've learned aren't covering these codes for certain clinicians, even though, or discipline types, even though Medicare states that they should. And so it can be a tricky process when there's new codes involved and kind of hit or miss in certain cases. But for the most part, commercial insurances follow Medicare. And so we're focusing in states where we know Medicaid is also covering those, because then it's likely the commercial insurances are covering those codes.
Sounds like a pain.
A little bit.
My third-party opinion. I mean, what are your guys'? I'm so fascinated by the reimbursement piece on devices and such that, I mean, you are going through this, like, figure out this. It's almost like you have this spider web wall behind you and you're figuring everything out, trying to make sure that you're going to get paid back from the services you provide. I mean, what sort of, from the more consultative and strategic side, like what are you guys looking at from a reimbursement standpoint?
So thinking about these journeys, so RPM codes, when you think about success and failure, I will say that sits on both sides, because finally you can get reimbursed for monitoring patients' blood pressure. And so when that happened, Alyssa can tell, like, every company, it was like RPM company, RPM, that's who was coming to us. And it was like, if I see another RPM company, because everybody thought, well, now you get a reimbursable code, so what we're going to sell to the hospital is that you're going to get a code. And is getting reimbursed important? Yes, it is. First of all, though, in general, hospitals, because they were like, you're going to make money. We're not going to make money, because the amount of work you have to do to get the small amount of reimbursement, we're talking like $30 a month that we would get reimbursed to have a person sit there and look through all the patient blood pressures if you don't have the right, and figure out what to do, and then the documentation you have to do. Well, I have to pay more than $30 for that person to do all this work plus the equipment. So we're not really, it's not a moneymaker, but every company thought it was going to be a moneymaker. So that is where there was a piece that really fell. So people were focusing on the codes versus focusing on the outcomes. So when we see RPM work really well is where they've built the platform in a way that's giving people the right information so they can do the work to get the reimbursement, but also it's going to make a difference in the outcome. So like we have a study going on right now with an Irish company, and they built a device to monitor something that's never been monitored before. And we're really seeing great patient outcomes with what it is, because patients never knew how well their wound was healing before and what they had to do to keep it healing well. And now that they're seeing that data and they know the nurses are seeing the data, we're seeing better compliance and wounds are healing faster. And so that's really, that's a really good use case, because they really started from the beginning, not thinking about the code, but thinking about the outcome.
Can I just say, I led a revenue cycle team that build RTM and RPM codes and have lived this reality. And so I kind of follow what's going on here. But if you don't, and you were to just take a big step back and say, how would I like payment for technology in healthcare to look like or to work? I imagine a lot of people would say something like, we'd want to put Alyssa and your clients and speech language pathologists who are doing great work with patients who need help in a position to adopt technology and reward them based on the outcomes that they get for that population. And that's just not the way that most of our health system is set up. It's much more activity-based. But that is changing, at least at a small scale. And so there's a program led by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, which is a federal agency within CMS, to pay for digital health innovation differently. And it's called Access. And I think it's a very exciting experiment that's going on right now. And if it goes well and continues to gain political support, could change much more of the way that that care is paid for. Right now, it's oriented around 4 clinical areas: musculoskeletal, 2 for kidney disease, and 1 for behavioral health. And it basically says, look, if you can leverage technology to move the needle on these predefined outcomes, we'll give you a lump sum of money to do that. Now, one of the challenges with this program is that lump sum of money is not very big. So you have to completely reimagine the way you deliver care to be more tech forward, to leverage highly trained providers better, to use AI. But that is pretty exciting to think about new models of delivering care. And I hope that more of our system heads in that direction.
We touched on 2 letters that everyone talks about, AI. In fact, if you're going to start a startup today, I would say use whatever you want the company name to be and just put .ai after it. Valuations will go up automatically. Is AI ready to supercharge patient engagement and outcomes today, or is it still maturing?
I think the answer is really both. So one of the pieces I think is really good about AI, you can start looking at the science and start looking at what are ways and what are technologies and platforms that have really good patient engagement, and feed those into the big AI bot and learn what that is so that you can build a company based on the success of others. So what do others do really well? And then we can replicate that. So I think that there's possibility in there of learning, like more quickly learning what's been done and what works. We have to remember, at the very edge of the beginning of this AI revolution. And so it's like, it can do all these things. It can, but there's still a lot of research and science to be done in that, and it can be really dangerous in healthcare. You talk about feeding things into WebMD and getting the worst case scenario. A good example is, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was the basically group that handles eating disorders. And so on their website, they decided that they would they were going to use a chatbot, an AI chatbot that they thought was kind of locked down to answer patient questions. They had really great engagement. So people with eating disorders logging in, asking questions. Well, very quickly, this chatbot started giving information about cutting calories and weighing yourself, and things that were very dangerous to people who had eating disorders. And so if you don't understand the fundamental science of how the technology works, and you're using OpenAI platforms, again, it can be very dangerous. So hospitals were really excited in the beginning. They've backed off a little bit because they're very wary of, like, how did you create what is your models, and are they open models? And so, because there's a lot of risk inherently for us with that as well.
Is it factual to say that AI could take us from patient monitoring to more predictive healthcare outcomes with the data sets that we may pour into them? Or, I guess maybe more for the startup side, I assume that changes regulatory if you're applying AI to your software, program, or app. But how are you all thinking about leveraging AI?
Yeah, so similar to part of the discussion earlier about the claims that you make as a company, what we have been careful to ensure is that we are not providing medical advice. And that is something that's a hoop that everyone building AI is going to have to jump through, or they're going to have to go through the entire regulatory process to say, hey, this device does this, and it is going to make these medical recommendations, and here's proof that they're accurate. And this is our percentage, which should be like less than 0.001 of error. And so that's a big challenge for a lot of companies right now. And I think in terms of supercharging the patient experience and engagement and progress, I think that's still, there's a little bit of a ways to go for that. I think the capability is there, but I think the training and just how honed that system has to be to that particular patient experience and disorder and all of the data that there ever has been on patients with this disorder, and then that particular patient themselves, that's the hurdle.
Just a couple quick points to add on AI that you're mentioning training reminded me of. There's a couple areas of cultural development. I think we would probably all say that technology is smart enough to help with healthcare, but can we really use it in a meaningful and safe way? The first area of development is actually giving AI models and healthcare AI apps the same sorts of certifications that we would give to humans, to run them through a kind of analogous training process that a nurse or an APP or a doctor or a specialist might have, which both narrows their scope of practice and gives them more intensive training on the same kinds of things that they're gonna need. And I know I'm anthropomorphizing AI probably too much, but I think that is a promising area that's not, hey, let's lock down these models so they can't ever do these things, but more like, let's evaluate each one on its merits and give it different jobs that then we as patients and the healthcare system can have a better conceptualization of. Like, this isn't just a black box that knows everything. This is something that's been trained in a particular way. And then on the flip side, I think we're gonna see more medical education models that prepare humans to use technology in different ways. And so we're gonna see specialties in the future that don't exist today and certainly didn't exist 10 years ago. Like my grandfather was a radiologist, but he was trained in Röntgenology, which is what x-rays were called at the time. Like, this was new technology and it led to a new medical specialty. And so in the future, are we gonna have AI native MDs who have some kind of ologist name, an AI-ologist, who can then interact with this technology in a much more particular and specialized way, which I think is then gonna solve some cultural and adoption problems and get more out of the technology.
Carlin's, quick, buy AI-ologist. Buy that domain really quick. Fire name, unicorn, right now.
As a tip to startup companies, as you think about the AI you're using, one of the things you talked about was the data and thinking about the data that exists, but you also have to be aware of the data that doesn't exist. And so there's particular pieces, if we think about drug discovery, and there's big talk now about how can we use AI in drug discovery. Invisible, I think it's called Invisible Women, was a great book talking about the data that's missing on women and how little research has been done. Absolutely. So if we think about women, they were not included in research trials until the 80s. And things haven't been tried on pregnant women.
1880s or 1980s?
1980s. So if you're thinking about, you're using a data set that's missing a key piece of information, like you're saying it's going to work, but is it? You don't have all the data that you need. So you need to be very aware, not just of the data you have, but of the data you don't have.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in the world of finance at one point in my life, and even now that we're working with all these AI companies, it's the same thing. It's data in, data out, and you're only as good as the data that is in the model or the program on getting the appropriate or the right results coming out on the back end. I am going to stop my line of questioning. I'm going to open it up to the audience. I'm going to walk around with a mic. So raise your hand if you have a question for the panel. It can be literally anything. And we'll just go around, and we'll do about 10 minutes of questioning.
Hi. Hello. My name is Faraz. I'm building care support robots for people living with dementia. And we talked about earlier about bridging the gap between patients and clinicians when it comes to data, but not overfeeding data to clinicians. But what are techniques that you guys have found helpful to properly filter data to all parties involved when it comes to care? So not just the clinicians who are a big part of it, but also the patient and also sometimes family caregivers, because each, I'll say, group has their own needs when it comes to data. And even when it comes to clinicians, there are sometimes different types of expertise that are involved that have only specific things that they're looking for. What are techniques that, and everyone wants something different, what are techniques that you have found helpful to kind of help with that filtering process?
Yeah, I can talk on that. So we have specialized who we target for our software, where our ideal customers are speech language pathology and occupational therapy clinics. Physical therapists are on our platform as well, but we, like me being a clinician, speech language pathologist background, I have been in the clinic, I've been across medical settings, I know essentially what they're looking for. And then we also always take into consideration their feedback and what they're looking for. I think that's where AI can be really powerful, is what data you do have, and the clinicians being able to customize that themselves, ask questions to it would be amazing if they can say like, hey, I've got all of this data for this patient. What's the piece that I'm interested in? Like, where's that at? And if it can produce a graph of progress over time for this particular area that they're interested in, that would be great with AI. And so what we're doing is taking what those clinicians are most interested in and kind of customizing what they see on their dashboards for each patient based on the progress that we see over time. And so for us, it's finding those data points that we can make consistent across, like, regardless of what kind of exercise or activity is assigned. And so that's also part of like the patient feedback. We're keeping it as streamlined as possible in terms of the assignment of that feedback. We've got a list of the types of forms that they could fill out, and then we show them the graph based on whatever they assign to that patient. That's how we're doing it, but I do think that it has to be, to your point, it has to be focused on what that clinician is interested in. And so specializing in, or if you can have advanced enough AI that can search that data or present it to the type of clinician, as long as you know the type of clinician that is accessing it at that time. And on the caregiver side, you're right, we have caregivers who can access the patient accounts on our side, and it is very different. We do have similar graphs of like progress over time that are visible by both the patient and the caregiver. One thing that is still needing to be done in tech is the difference between the caregiver access versus the patient, and understanding that patient, if they have dementia, they are likely not the ones using the technology, and if they are, it has to be a much simplified version compared to what the caregiver is seeing, who may be communicating with the clinician on that platform, maybe the one administering the medication, so they have to get reminders for that. There is a difference, so I appreciate what you're doing as well.
And I would just say for startup, get good UX designers, getting feedback from people really early on. Don't make them, build the platform they want from the beginning.
We'll go here.
Hi, I'm Ashwini. I've been associated with the healthcare technology for, I'm going to date myself, for more than 2 decades, almost 25, 30 years, from home health, biotech, pharma, payer, provider, different areas of healthcare, if you will. And after many years of being associated with the corporate world, I'm indulging myself into my own venture and helping the health system, if you will, overall, not just a payer or provider, but the continuum of healthcare. And thank you for your participation and your thoughts. I think each one of you will probably have a different view on my question, and that is, when you come up with your own ideas of, Ryan, from your perspective, or from a speech therapist perspective, or from a provider perspective, solving a problem, a tech company or a technology savvy initiative, without looking into the business side of it, if you will, from a clinician perspective, and Ryan, probably that's why I see a lot of clinicians on your company's roster, if you will, without engaging, and what have you experienced in an engagement with the consumers, with the clinicians, for example, for a platform that is for the clinicians, or not engaging. A lot of technology companies come up with this idea of, here's my platform, as you mentioned, here's my platform, take it and use it, and it's going to bring a lot of value to you. How many of them do you think have used the services of an expert to build that platform and offer you a service out of it, if you will, versus pure dumping a platform on you? Any thoughts on that? Am I making sense?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's we don't want people to be there, or there are people who are building softwares without speaking to the patients or clinicians and understanding how to work in their workflows.
That's right.
Is that correct? So yeah, I mean, being a clinician myself, I'll probably let Ethel and Ryan talk on this one a little bit more. But being a clinician myself, I know how important it is to communicate with those clinicians. And there are certain things, though, that we had to learn related to the reimbursement pathway and the data that the clinicians needed to see in order to more easily bill those codes and know what they're supposed to be billing, and the training that's necessary, because this is a completely new reimbursement pathway. That's where we've had to learn a lot and change our approach to our onboarding and training of clinics. But yeah, I do see that as an issue if we're just dumping technology in someone's lap and saying, here, use it. It's really cool, and this is what it's supposed to do, without considering the day-to-day of those clinicians and those patients and how they're going to use it and when and why. That's a missing piece of some technologies out there.
I'd say another piece is people not thinking about the real problem they're trying to solve. Oftentimes people aren't trying to solve the right problem. So diabetes is a great example. Like, we have this platform for diabetes, and it's about the patient not eating right, or it's about, you just don't have the blood, you're not getting the glucose measurements. So we're going to give you a platform that gives you the glucose measurements. And so that's not necessarily just giving us more data about the problem is not necessarily going to fix the problem. And so, as a startup, you have to really think about what is fundamentally the problem that you're trying to solve, and really doing deep research into that problem. One of our companies, we just are signing a distribution deal soon. And part of it is because we did the deep research to begin with on safe sleep simulation, which is up for a Mir Award, and really thinking about, we're trying to solve for infant mortality, but what is part of the problem? It's because we're still having babies who are sleeping on their back or in their stomachs, but why? And it's culture, and it's education, and it's lack of that. So really looking into the problem before we even built a solution.
Last question.
Hi, thanks guys for being here today. Ryan, you already spoke to this a little bit around the pilot program that's coming out of the FDA. I can't remember any of the acronyms, but that was exciting and something I'd never heard of before. As someone who's been working with founders for a long time, and somebody who's also from Ireland and thinks about the healthcare system very naively or from a totally different perspective, I find that a lot of founders come out guns blazing with patients' best interests, and they have a specific problem, to your point, that they're trying to solve. And then as they go further down the pathway, they realize that they need to retrofit their vision to the regulatory side of things and the commercialization side of things. And my experience of living in this country in the past 5 years has resulted in a lot of frustration to understand how the healthcare system works, and this incentives-based structure to understand, okay, we're solving for a commercialization problem, and obviously a lot of the funding of the system happens through Medicare and Medicaid in this country. I only discovered the numbers of the actual volume last week. I think as folks who think about the future and technology, do you guys foresee in our lifetime a movement beyond these pilot programs of thinking about a different fundamental healthcare system? Do you see that being feasible in our lifetime, that we can shift towards a different style of healthcare model that can truly allow the patient and outcomes to come first?
It's a great question to end on. I do. No, absolutely. I think the CMS Access program I mentioned earlier is one reason for optimism, but I think you have to recognize that as revolutionary as that is as a departure from the fee-for-service reality, it's still fundamentally located in a insurance-based system. Another kind of green shoot that I keep an eye on is cash pay healthcare and direct primary care and the kinds of innovations that are actually being driven, not only from grassroots patients who kind of look at this as you all have and say, this like doesn't add up, but also employers who, as Ethel mentioned earlier, and I was an employer of a small business, I saw what it cost to provide health insurance to my employees, say, look, we have to think about this in a much different way. And so I think in both of those instances, it's probably good for technology companies and for startups to think about how they could ride that wave, because if you are putting a greater degree of our total healthcare spending back into out of pocket, where you say, look, I'm not going to buy health insurance, I'm just going to, take a pot of money and manage this myself, then you have consumers who are making a lot more of these individual decisions. It's not, does the insurance company believe in my product? Is there a code? It's just like, do I think this is going to help me? And if so, I will pay out of pocket for it, which I think is a growing proportion of our spending, even without revolutionary change. Like everyone sitting in this room has their deductibles going up, is finding fewer and fewer things are covered. We're seeing that kind of deterioration across the existing system, and there are people who are innovating more thoroughly.
All right, so time is up. I'm going to say there's a gentleman who was the CEO of Anthem from the late 70s, early 2000s. His name's Ben Lytle. He is a mentor and dear friend of mine, lives in Arizona, makes trips back to central Indiana fairly regularly. He is on a pathway, and he is, if there is one man who can do this, it would be him. He is as motivated to change the structure of healthcare in this country. He is having meetings with this administration. They are listening to him because he's worked with every administration for the last 40 years, given his position at Anthem. If you want to look up somebody that you want to maybe connect with to learn, Ben Lytle is his name. He is one of one, and he is on a war path to change this because it needs to be changed. Quite frankly, my family pays a ton of money every month, and we don't go to the doctor. Yep. We are looking at, like, how do we not have insurance and just go through, like, some sort of Christian group where we can give money to that? And because financially, it makes far more sense to me in the moment. Now, if we have some catastrophic problem, but then again, you could just tell the hospital you're not paying them, and it gets written off, and it's no big deal. So I have so many problems with our hospital system and healthcare system. Ethel, I'm telling you, I got people that tell me this all the time. But anyway, to digress, because we're over time, and David's telling me, all right, stop what I'm about ready to say. I think it's important. I think, Ethel, where do you live today? Not the address, but the city, and then where's HQ for each of you? And then I'll tell you why I'm asking that question.
We are in Fort Wayne. We're based in Fort Wayne. However, we do have an office at 16 Tech.
I live in South Bend, and our company's based in London.
Fishers and Fishers. I'm here.
And I'm Fort Wayne, and we're headquartered in Silicon Valley. I think that's important. What Launch Fishers has provided you today is it's not a bunch of people from central Indiana talking to you about this. It's people truly from around the state. We've went from Ireland to Indiana, and I think at the bottom it says connecting innovators across healthcare. Launch Fishers did that today. So I think a round of applause for Launch Fishers and what they put on. And with that, make sure you guys follow them on LinkedIn. I'm sure they're huge influencers on LinkedIn. Find time here to go talk to them. But let's give a round of applause to the panel. Hold on, I think David's got something.
No, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Ethel. Thanks, Ryan. Alyssa, thank you. It was awesome. I thought maybe I had to have to come up and separate you and Ethel here at the end. You know, a couple things real quick. I'm staring at time's up, so I don't have much. It's awesome. Sitting in the crowd, it reminds me why we're doing these events. We want to keep doing them. As I said at the start, you're always welcome to come back and attend these. I'm going to get to something here in my hand, but it's cool to come and listen to experts here talk about what's happening in our healthcare system. When I get to talk to a gentleman here today who's, you know, no matter where you are in this, in your life or what's going on, someone who's working in a large pharma company here, and I won't name that company, but you can probably predict and think what it is, but who says to me, I'm there full time, but I'm moonlighting at night and in the evenings and weekends, and I've got a startup that I'm working on. That's awesome. A gentleman here that asked a question that's been in this for many decades. That's what this is all about, you know, what we're trying to convene and do here. So we will keep this up. On your tables there, on Monday, you can scan this, a QR code. We are going to do another event. Maybe on Monday, it's at what, Monday the 11th, maybe we'll solve all of our healthcare questions then. We'll have all the answers to all the challenges. If you scan that, we will be doing an event called the MedTech Crossroads. This is an opportunity to meet the Batch 5 companies that are up in Warsaw with Plug and Play and ZB, Zimmer Biomet, Parkview, Launch, and all of our partners. It will be here. Mayor Fadness will kick it off. We'll have a panel and some other people there. Lunch will be provided, so please join us. Again, scan, sign up, or send it along to other people. And then I want to say thank you to Ashley for helping us put this together, coordinate, and Rachel in the back. But thank you for attending today. Hopefully this was worth your time, and we look forward to having you back. Have a great day.
Thank you.